This is Change Your Mindset Podcast, the podcast that helps change your life by helping change the mindset of the 99% into the 1% mindset. Here's your host, Adrian Gomez.
Welcome to another podcast episode of Change Your Mindset. As always, I'm your host, Adrian Gomez. So I'm going to be quoting motivational quotes and who they are from. One thing you need to understand, though, that motivation does not get you where you want to be in life. Motivation might help you for a day. Motivation can possibly help you for a week. But you need to understand that you cannot rely on motivation to do the things you have to do. Because if you only do things when you are motivated, what if you were only motivated once a week? What if you're motivated only once a month, maybe twice a month? So for those days that you're not motivated, what are you going to do? Waste those days, not do what you have to do? You cannot rely on motivation. Motivational quotes, motivational speeches can help you for the short term, but not the long term. In the long term, you have to be consistent and disciplined to get to your goals or to wherever you want to be in life. Whether you feel motivated or not motivated to do it, you have to do it. So I'm going to read approximately a little bit more than 100 motivational quotes. So the first one is, quote, "Great things come from hard work and perseverance. No excuses." End quote. Kobe Bryant. Quote, "Don't count the days, make the days count." End quote. Muhammad Ali. Quote, "Embrace the journey of self-improvement with unwavering determination, for in the crucible of growth, men forge the brightest versions of themselves." End quote. Muhammad Ali. Quote, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." End quote. Eleanor Roosevelt. Quote, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." End quote. Winston Churchill. Quote, "The only way to achieve the impossible is to believe it is possible." End quote. Carl Kingsley, Alice in Wonderland. Quote, "Your time is limited. Don't waste it living someone else's life." End quote. Steve Jobs. Quote, "The only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today." End quote. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Quote, "Believe you can and you're halfway there." End quote. Theodore Roosevelt. Quote, "The only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be." End quote. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Quote, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." End quote. Peter Drucker. Quote, "Success is walking from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm." End quote. Winston Churchill. Quote, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." End quote. Wayne Gretzky. Quote, "The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." End quote. Lao Tzu. Quote, "If you want to achieve greatness, stop asking for permission." End quote. Anonymous. Quote, "Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work." End quote. Steve Jobs. Quote, "The only place where success comes before work is in the dictionary." End quote. Vidal Sassoon. Quote, "The harder the conflict, the greater the triumph." End quote. George Washington. Quote, "Don't watch the clock, do what it does. Keep going." End quote. Sam Levinson. Quote, "Success is not what you have, but who you are." End quote. Bo Bennett. Quote, "The only thing standing between you and your goal is the story you keep telling yourself as to why you can't achieve it." End quote. Jordan Belfort. Quote, "The first step towards success is taken when you refuse to be a captive of the environment in which you first find yourself." End quote. Mark Cain. Quote, Don't be afraid to give up the good to go for the great. John D. Rockefeller. Quote, the secret to getting ahead is getting started. End quote. Mark Twain. Quote, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. End quote. John Lennon. Quote, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. End quote. Mark Twain. Quote, success is not how high you have climbed, but how you make a positive difference to the world. End quote. Roy T. Bennett. Quote, believe in yourself and all that you are. Know that there is something inside you that is greater than any obstacle. End quote. Christian D. Larson. Quote, the only way to do great work is to love what you do. End quote. Steve Jobs. Quote, you are never too old to set another goal or to dream a new dream. End quote. C.S. Lewis. Quote, the difference between a successful person and others is not a lack of strength, not a lack of knowledge, but rather a lack in will. End quote. Vince Lombardi. Quote, the only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. End quote. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Quote, embrace the challenges of today as stepping stones towards the success of tomorrow. End quote. Anonymous. Quote, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. End quote. Buddha. Quote, don't let yesterday take up too much of today. End quote. Will Rogers. Quote, the only time you fail is when you fall and stay down. End quote. Stephen Richards. Quote, you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. End quote. Zig Ziglar. Quote, success is not about being the best. It's about being better than you were yesterday. End quote. Anonymous. Quote, if you can dream it, you can achieve it. End quote. Zig Ziglar. Quote, the only way to achieve greatness is to believe in yourself and never give up. End quote. Serena Williams. Quote, champions are not made in the comfort of success, but in the adversity of failure. End quote. Michael Jordan. Quote, success is not about winning all the time. It's about getting up every time you fall. End quote. Cristiano Ronaldo. Quote, you have to accept things of yourself before you can do them. End quote. Michael Phelps. Quote, the harder you work, the luckier you get. End quote. Gary Player. Quote, don't let anyone tell you what you can't do. If you have a dream, you've got to protect it. End quote. Usain Bolt. Quote, when you have a clear vision of your goal, nothing can stand in your way. End quote. Lindsey Vonn. Quote, you can't put a limit on anything. The more you dream, the farther you get. End quote. Michael Phelps. Quote, it's not the will to win that matters. Everyone has that. It's the will to be prepared to win that matters. End quote. Paul Bear Bryant. Quote, success is not just about what you accomplish, but the obstacles you overcome. End quote. Jackie Joyner. Quote, success is not about how many times you fall. It's about how many times you get back up. Mia Hamm. Quote, the difference between the impossible and the possible lies in a person's determination. End quote. Tommy Lacerda. Quote, set your goals high and don't stop till you get there. End quote. Bo Jackson. Quote, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. End quote. Archie Griffin. Quote, success is measured by the discipline and dedication you bring to the table. End quote. Keith Sethi. Quote, the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. End quote. Nelson Mandela. Quote, there may be people that have more talent than you, but there's no excuse for anyone to work harder than you. End quote. Derek Jeter. Quote, I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeeded. End quote. Michael Jordan. Quote, the best way to predict the future is to create it. End quote. Abraham Lincoln. Quote, change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. End quote. John F. Kennedy. Quote, do not pray for easy lives, pray to be stronger men. End quote. John F. Kennedy. Quote, in the end, it's not the years in your life that count. It's the life in your years. End quote. Abraham Lincoln. Quote, we must find time to stop and thank the people who make a difference in our lives. End quote. John F. Kennedy. Quote, we can't help everyone, but everyone can help someone. End quote. Ronald Reagan. Quote, the future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted, it belongs to the brave. End quote. Ronald Reagan. Quote, let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. End quote. John F. Kennedy. Quote, the test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. End quote. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Quote, the only real prison is fear, and the only real freedom is freedom from fear. End quote. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Quote, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. End quote. John Quincy Adams. Quote, it's amazing what you can accomplish if you do not care who gets the credit. End quote. Harry S. Truman. Quote, if you want to lift yourself up, lift up someone else. End quote. Booker T. Washington, quoted by Harry S. Truman. Quote, we can complain because rose bushes have thorns, or rejoice because thorns have roses. End quote. Abraham Lincoln. Quote, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. End quote. Martin Luther King Jr., quoted by John F. Kennedy. Quote, I walk slowly, but I never walk backwards. End quote. Abraham Lincoln. Quote, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. End quote. Edmund Burke, quoted by John F. Kennedy. Quote, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. End quote. Chinese proverb, quoted by Theodore Roosevelt. Quote, the most effective way to do it is to do it. End quote. Amelia Earhart. Quote, a man is not finished when he is defeated. He is finished when he quits. End quote. Richard Nixon. Quote, success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Winston Churchill, quoted by Franklin D. Roosevelt. Quote, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. End quote. Socrates. Quote, the unexamined life is not worth living. End quote. Socrates. Quote, happiness is not something ready-made. It comes from your own actions. End quote. Dalai Lama. Quote, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. End quote. Aristotle. Quote, the only way to deal with fear is to face it. Seneca. Quote, life without reflection is not worth living. End quote. Confucius. Quote, we are in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. End quote. Oscar Wilde. Quote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. End quote. Marcus Aurelius. Quote, the only thing standing between you and your goal is the story you keep telling yourself as to why you can't achieve it. End quote. Jordan Belfort. Quote, the first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself. End quote. Plato. Quote, man is the measure of all things. End quote. Protagoras. Quote, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. End quote. Friedrich Nietzsche. Quote, do not wait for leaders. Do it alone, person to person. End quote. Mother Teresa. Quote, what we think, we become. End quote. Marcus Aurelius. Quote, the greatest wealth is to live content with little. End quote. Plato. Quote, happiness is the highest good. End quote. Aristotle. Quote, the only constant in life is change. End quote. Heraclitus. Quote, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. End quote. Aristotle. Quote, a person who never made a mistake never tried anything new. End quote. Albert Einstein. Quote, be the change that you wish to see in the world. End quote. Mahatma Gandhi. Quote, the true sign of intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination. End quote. Albert Einstein. Quote, I think, therefore I am. End quote. Rene Descartes. Quote, the function of man is to live, not to exist. End quote. Jack London. Quote, the only journey is the one within. End quote. Rainer Maria Rilke. Quote, Veni, Vidi, Vici. End quote. Julius Caesar. Quote, fortune favors the brave. End quote. Terence. Quote, what we achieve inwardly will change outer reality. End quote. Plutarch. Quote, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. End quote. Seneca. Quote, excellence is never an accident. It is always a result of high intention, sincere effort, and intelligent execution. End quote. Virgil. Quote, he who conquers himself is the mightiest warrior. End quote. Publius Cyrus. Quote, "The greatest wealth is a poverty of desires." End quote. Seneca. Quote, "Life is not merely being alive, but being well." End quote. Marcus Valerius Martilius. Quote, "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can, and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." End quote. Lucius Annius Seneca. Quote, "Success is not greedy, as people think, but insignificant. That is why it satisfies nobody." End quote. Lucius Annius Seneca. Quote, "While we are postponing, life speeds up." End quote. Seneca. And that's going to be it for the quotes. All these quotes are from either presidents, athletes, people that changed the world, and philosophers. All these people did something with their lives, and they became great. That's why we say quotes from them. These quotes might motivate you. They might change the way you think. They might help you get through certain times. But at the end of the day, they are just words. Words do not change your life. You have to take action to change your life. And that's what these people did. And that's why I'm saying quotes from them. Because they took action into their own hands and did something to change their life and have a better life and leave a legacy. What will your legacy be? Maybe one day we'll repeat a quote from you. That's going to be it for this podcast. I appreciate you guys listening to these motivational quotes. Hopefully they did help you out. Hopefully they changed the way you think. Hopefully it was beneficial for you. And as always, thank you, Patron member Blade262, for supporting the podcast and helping out financially. It truly does help the podcast. And if you want to be a Patron member, the link will be in the description below. Thank you guys as always. Please share with other people because you guys can help spread the podcast more than I can do by myself. As always, I wish you guys the best and improve every single day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Change Your Mindset podcast. Be sure to tune in every week for a new episode. As always, change your mindset to change your life.